Yeah, so apologies to anyone in the crowd who's not numerate. I'm a physicist, so there will be numbers. Yeah, so as Joan and Richard mentioned, the Comprehensive Energy Plan was published in December of 2011. I had been on the job for 2 months. I had a chance to rewrite a couple of little sections and tweak them, but that's about the extent of my contribution. But thankfully, I have a really good staff, and they had already done a whole bunch of really good work. So I was left to carry forward actually a pretty good comprehensive energy plan. So it's nice to be able to come around and tell you about what is, in its creation, many other people's work, and then as it carries forward, my contributions and my understanding of the details grow.
You may have to talk up because can you guys hear in the really back?
Okay. Please speak up if you can't hear me in the back. I don't mind at all. I spent plenty of years in rooms a lot like this not that long ago, so I know what it's like. So a comprehensive energy plan. So in Vermont statute, we're required to put out a comprehensive energy plan every 5 years. The last one before the one that came out in 2011 came out in 1998. It's not easy to put together a comprehensive energy plan and to get all of the people who need to sign off on it in all of its details to do so. It didn't happen at all in the entire previous gubernatorial administration. You know, I don't fault them for that in the least. It is a heavy lift. They got very close and were unable to publish one. But generally speaking, the point of having a plan is to try to figure out how to take these aspirations and turn them into some sort of set of action items. So very broad statement in state law. We're trying to find energy, adequate, reliable supply that's secure, that is sustainable, that we can afford, that's good for the economy. We're trying to use all that energy efficiently and cost effectively, all in an environmentally sound way. And you've got to balance all of these things and figure out how to make all of this somehow come true at once. So tell you a little bit about how we are setting about to do this. So first, I'll give a little summary, numbers-wise, where we are now in terms of our energy use, where it comes from, what we use it for. Because understanding that and understanding the scale is a really key piece in understanding what it takes to actually do this. Then I'll discuss the long-term goal a little bit. No surprise, it's in the posters for this talk, 90% by 2050. Talk a little about why that goal, why try to go that way. A little bit about the way that we think about doing that, and hopefully a few minutes at the end. Hopefully I won't have to spend that much on the first pieces so that I can talk a little bit about what we've done since the plan, because most of the stuff that you need to understand about the plan is in the plan. So if you just read it, you'll be fine. But the real rub is how do you turn that into something that's happening for real. So where are we now? Well, now 2010 is the last good statewide data that we have. This is data from the Energy Information Agency going back to 1960 of what we've used energy for in Vermont. So big picture, we use twice as much energy now, basically, as we did in 1960. The industrial sector uses about the same amount of energy as it did then, for pretty different stuff. Residential buildings up a bit. Transportation up by 2 or 3 factors. Commercial sector up by about a factor of 2. But big picture, transportation, we're a rural state. Chittenden County is a little bit different, but you know, there's a lot of folks who drive 40 miles every day, one way and back and forth. There's a lot of energy use in that. So don't try to read this, just warning. But I'll point to the wedges and explain sort of what they are. Is there a good pointer? I'm picturing like a nice piece of wood, but anyway, I'm not going to get it. Yeah, my finger might have to do. So big picture, this central pie is all the energy we use in the state of Vermont. Transportation upper left, residential upper right, commercial sector lower right, industrial sector lower left. The numbers I carry in my head is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, transportation, residential, and then commercial, industrial, people making money, the other third. one thing to notice about this, transportation is really different from the others. We don't use electricity for transportation, at least very, very little. It's basically all liquid fossil fuels. Big gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, that's the transportation sector. The other sectors are different variants on the theme of some amount of electricity and some amount of other stuff. And the other stuff is almost entirely used for heat. Building heat in residential and commercial, industrial processes in the lower left. That's a particular challenge I'll come back to in a minute. Commercial buildings, a lot more electricity, a lot more lights that are just on all the time, computers that are running all the time, air conditioning systems that have to run during the hottest part of a summer day. So that's this side is all electricity in the commercial sector, and then this is heating commercial buildings. On the residential side, heating is more than half of the energy that we use in residential buildings. So speaking of the heating bill. And then on the industrial side, there's a lot more little wedges because all the different kinds of industrial processes need different kinds of fossil fuel inputs, and then a bunch of electricity. So just to get you a general sense of what we're up against, if you wanted to look at this, the next slide will make this a little more clear too, but say, well, OK, where are all the renewables? Right. There's a wood heating wedge. There's a wood heating wedge. There's a little bit of wood. I think it's in the other wedge on the industrial side. That's the paper industry, basically. And then there's some in the electricity. But that's what we've got. You try to turn this entire thing into 90% renewable. So on the electricity side, I like to focus on the portfolio a few years out, 2016. That's what this is a sense of what the 2016 portfolio looks like. We don't know where a third of our electricity in 2016 is going to come from. It's just not under contract yet, not yet built, or just not yet signed up for. The rest we know. The reason I go out a few years is that until, say, sometime in 2011, our electric mix was really stable for 15, 20 years. And then a Hydro-Quebec contract is ending. Our contract with Vermont Yankee ended. And there was a decade of angst about what are we going to do when we fall off this cliff when those two contracts end. Right? So we're on the far side of that. We didn't die. The lights are still on. We're OK. Right? But there is this period of transition. There's a new Hydro-Quebec contract that's phasing in. There are new contracts for nuclear resources and other things. There are wind farms now in operation, et cetera. So we have a little better sense of what things look like when all that sort of sugars out in 2016 and beyond. So 16, 17, 18 all look about like this. 11, 12, 10, 11 looked like something else. And all the years in between are not really useful to look at because they're all just jumbles. But big picture, 12% roughly from nuclear, 6% already under contract for generic market purchases. That's basically natural gas plants. 23% from Hydro-Quebec and from large hydros on the St. Lawrence. And then small hydros in Vermont, the Winooski plant you see when you cross the river just over there, and others. Then wind, methane, and this is both cow power and landfill methane, Coventry landfill, et cetera. And then wood, and then solar and others are hidden in the last piece. So for all the excitement about solar, we're lucky that it rounds. I think maybe by 2016, if we're lucky, it'll round down to 1% instead of rounding up, right? But the scale is important here to recognize that, for example, the wind piece, this 9%, is 5 goodly sized wind facilities. So when you think about, when you have the siting conversation later, what happens when you try to take any one of these wedges and make them very large, other than just hooking a pipe up to Quebec, basically. So just a little sense of what that all is. Now, what does that mean in terms of global warming, about hitting our greenhouse gas targets? So back about 10 years ago or so, the state established a goal that by 2012, we would be 25% below 1990 levels. So 1990 is on the left-hand side of this chart. 2012 is where this little arrow goes, right here. That would be 25% below. So We did not hit that. We're lucky that we were basically right at 1990 levels, given that we went up 15% or so in the middle and have come back down again. Thankfully, we also have other goals that are further out and maybe a little more achievable. There's a 2028 goal of being at half of 1990 levels, which, if you sort of squint, you can sort of make it maybe happen. And then 75% by 2050, another 22 years after that. So the one real challenge we have is that this date is getting closer all the time. It's 15 years from now. That's one vehicle lifetime from now, for example. So thinking about how you hit that is a challenge. It's exciting, but it will require work. It's not just going to happen. So just to give you a tour of this, the bottom piece is electricity. This is that mix, that big chunk of Hydro-Quebec, that big chunk of nuclear have kept us nice and low. There's a little step up here when those contracts end and we get wind we don't get to count anymore because we don't have a renewable portfolio standard, and it goes up. But it's still only this size. Compared with those nice fuel oil and heating oil and natural gas uses, gasoline, diesel. So very roughly speaking, aside from natural gas, here to there is liquid fossil fuels. So figuring out how we tackle those and what we have in our arsenal to take liquid fossil fuels and turn them into some alternative. So what are we trying to do? Depending on how you do your math, and there are actually multiple ways to do the math, someone could write a paper on this, how you count renewability, how you put a solar-generated electron on the grid, on how many grams of gasoline is that worth? It's a non-trivial calculation, but depending on how you do that, in 2011 we were sort of 20 to 25% renewable. Just to say, you could do that, you could do a totally reputable piece of math and say we were 12%. So it's not super obvious. But 90%, again, it'll depend on how you do the math, but it's a really high number no matter how you do the math. Right? So figuring out how to get there is a challenge, but it's nice that target is for a couple years after my retirement date, basically. Right? So basically, figuring out how to do that, that's my career. Right? I have my daughter, who is 2 months old now, will be my age when we get here, roughly speaking, within a couple of years. So we can't leave it to her, right? Because she will only just be getting going by the time we have to have completed this. You guys are about the latest, youngest generation that will actually be actively involved in helping us do this. People younger than you won't be active in time. So you may have to push from behind some of the time, but if we all push together, I think we can do it. So what will it actually? Well, what do we get when we do this? First, economic security and independence. All of those liquid fossil fuels. Anybody seen any oil derricks in Vermont? Natural gas fracking fields? Any of that? No. All right. So that's all money. That's all dependence on the global price of oil. That's all dependence on EPA environmental regulations for fracking that have our economy, have hold of the tail or maybe the neck of our economy, depending on who you would ask. So that economic security that comes from renewables that can be much more local, that are not tied as much to global forces, to China and India's demand for oil that will change the price of what it costs to heat a home in Vermont. So having those pieces at our disposal and actually under our control here is very good. It hits that security and affordability piece of state energy policy and economic vitality just straight on. So safeguarding our environment, we just went through the greenhouse gas piece. There are other real benefits in terms of air quality, water quality that can come with this kind of transition. The extent to which Vermont transitioning can inspire others will keep us from having to breathe too much downwind coal from other states, et cetera. So understanding that the largest sources of air pollution in the state are mobile sources. They're cars, So all the particulates that come out of tailpipes, that's, if we could figure out a different way to do this, that's everybody's lungs healthier, that's our climate being in better shape. Innovation and jobs creation. So I'll get to this again in a little bit, but one of the things that this transition looks like is a lot more capital investment and a lot less operating cost. Operating cost is money we spend on fuel to bring in from somewhere else. Capital investment is things that we build and buy that remain here, that are local money and local labor that went into installing that capital in the first place. Also, figuring out new business models. We have, there's a solar startup in the state that has gone from nothing to installing a third of all the solar in the state in like 18 months, right? So, it's a business with 40 employees, so people are figuring stuff out, they're making things happen, and they're making jobs in Vermont. And community involvement and investment. Keeping things local means keeping things down the street. It means your neighbor is involved. It means you are involved. It means when you retrofit your home, when you put in a heat pump, when you buy an electric vehicle, that's as much about your interaction with your neighbors as it is about your helping the state meet its goal. So what do we actually do to do this? There's 4 things that work together: outreach and education, changing hearts and minds, getting folks to understand the benefits and act on the actions that they can take to help make a difference. Finance and funding. I mentioned the capital intensiveness of this switch. So that means access to capital, money capital, matters. Turning those capital investments into things that pay off over time and that you can invest in over time means getting the financial community involved, means borrowing a bunch of money now to pay it back later. How do you do that? How do you do that at scale? Recognizing that for all of it being huge, Vermont is tiny. When we put together our PACE clean energy loan programs for homes, the challenge is that we can pretty easily see how you get to, say, $5 million worth of loans for folks. And the Wall Street banks say, come back when you've got 20 or 25. But there's no one in Vermont who can lend 5. The banks are too small. So we're stuck in a scale issue there, even just figuring out how to make this piece work. But there's folks working on it. So innovation and expertise, figuring out these technologies, figuring out how to run a grid that's got a lot of solar and wind and hydro and electric vehicles how does that work? Can we actually make that grid run as well and as reliably and as low cost as the grid we have been running, but in a much more dynamic way? Just as one example of this. And getting the right regulatory policies and structures. There is no free market in energy. The closest is probably the global price of oil, but even that's basically controlled by OPEC. So not really a free market. So government steps in and helps to set and make the rules. So how do we design the rules so that it's in everyone's interest to make a bunch of money and get us through this transition at the same time? And where they make a bunch of money and you save a bunch of money somehow all at the same time. So we have to figure out how to make those pieces work in a way that rewards people for investment and also is affordable and makes this happen. So, okay, all right. So progress so far. I'll put the other ones up for discussion points. So things we've done that the Comprehensive Energy Plan asked for and called for. We had a thermal efficiency task force. We've redesigned the standard offer program. We had the siting commission that Joan was involved in. We've had significant increases in transportation funding for things other than just building roads. And we've been working on electric vehicles. So I'll skip over some of this stuff and just run through a couple of these. We're running a big study now that your professor managed to not come to the focus group we invited him to. But some of the things we've learned along the way. So in terms of just physically, how do you do this? The first thing is you can do it if you cut the total amount of energy we use in the state in half. So vehicles all twice as efficient, buildings all twice as efficient, LED light bulbs instead of even fluorescents, et cetera, and take that total energy use way, way down. There are limited numbers and amounts of sustainable resources. This matters if we choose to do a biomass-heavy pathway. there's only so much wood. If we choose to just import a bunch of hydro from Quebec, well, Connecticut wants access to that as well, and maybe Quebec just wants to keep it for themselves. So figuring out how to work within a limited pie. There's a lot of interest in small-scale and distributed resources, which can be a significant, a portion of the solution, but they can't get us all the way there. So figuring out how do you deal with both small-scale and large-scale and having them play nicely together. Heavy-duty transportation in the industrial sector are particular challenges. You have industrial processes that depend on particular temperatures. You have folks who need really fast turnaround and payback for their investments in order to make that work. In heavy-duty transportation, we can't electrify. Trucks weigh too much. So what do? Biofuels, natural gas, what are your options? And then on the policy side, as I mentioned, it's not a free market. There's a lot of market failures. So just setting the right price, saying, well, carbon is worth $100 a ton and we'll just set the price and walk away, it's not clear that that would work. I mentioned the capital infrastructure piece. The other aspect of that is we may only have the money and the time to build out one set of infrastructure. If we get it wrong, if we build the wrong set of infrastructure, we will have wasted a bunch of money. So how do you decide which of the many different kinds of infrastructure you can build, you should build? You can't build all of them, you don't have enough money. So do you build out natural gas infrastructure? Do you build out electric vehicle infrastructure for transportation? Or hydrogen? You can really only do one of them. Which one do you do? So that's interesting kind of choices and challenges. There's a reluctance to pick winners. Well, nobody faults you when you pick winners. There's a reluctance to pick losers. But at the same time, the government's not supposed to pick winners and losers. But someone's got to. So how do you balance that? And key last thing is that in order to make this all work, economic development policy, land use policy, forestry policy, farm policy, and energy policy all have to be compatible and work together. And the nice thing is that it actually looks like there might be some pathways that actually do that, as opposed to setting these things in conflict with each other. So we're trying to figure out what those pathways look like. That's what this study is about. We're excited about it, and I'm happy to talk about this stuff with you for the rest of the time. Thanks.